Number one, will Brian Kelly and Tommy Rees open up the offense? Here's the reality. Notre Dame simply cannot keep doing what they've been doing on offense in recent seasons. They just can't. Notre Dame has been good enough on offense to continue to go out there and beat the teams they're supposed to beat. But as we've seen, when there's a lot more on the line, the Notre Dame offense just simply hasn't been good enough. You go back to the Cotton Bowl in 2018. Notre Dame scored 3 points in the Cotton Bowl. This year in the ACC title game, they scored 10. 7 of those came late in the game when there was no doubt about the outcome. And Notre Dame only scored 14 points in the Rose Bowl against Alabama. And again, 7 of those points came very late in the game when it was already decided and Alabama had pulled their starters. Even if you go back to November 7th, when you look at the Notre Dame 47-40 victory over Clemson, we have to be honest about that performance. Notre Dame scored 33 regular season regulation points. 7 of those points came off of a defensive touchdown, and another 3 points came off of a turnover that the defense forced that allowed the offense to get 3 points, even though it lost yards on that drive. The offense did some good things in that game. I'm not going to take away from it. And in overtime, they especially did some good things. But the reality is that was a different situation of a banged-up Clemson team that didn't have 3 starters on defense, didn't have its all-world quarterback. And even then, the offense for Notre Dame, although it made some clutch plays, it really wasn't good enough, in my opinion, to beat one of those big-time teams if they were even close to being at full strength. Now, they handled their business that day, but the other part we have to realize is that was more of an anomaly. Notre Dame has played Georgia twice. They've scored 19 and 17 points. It's not going to get it done. Now, against a team like Georgia, it was close to getting it done, but the reality is in both games against Georgia, the offense got the ball late in the fourth quarter with a chance to go out and in the first game, a field goal wins the game, and in the second game, a touchdown wins the game. In the second game in 2019, Notre Dame actually got the ball near midfield, actually inside midfield, and couldn't put a scoring drive together. So the reality is the offense just hasn't been good enough from a scoring standpoint. They have to open it up. They have to be more explosive. They've got the players to do it. So what does that look like? Well, for me, it's a philosophical thing more than anything else. Number one, I need to see Notre Dame push the tempo. Now, a lot of times when you talk about pushing the tempo, I think the thought that people have immediately is, Oregon under Chip Kelly. That's not what I'm talking about. Alabama didn't look like Oregon under Chip Kelly. Ohio State doesn't look like Alabama under Chip Kelly. Or none of them look like Wake Forest, for example, who's just trying to run a million plays. Clemson doesn't look like that. Oklahoma doesn't look like that. None of the great teams, none of the great offenses are teams that are just going at this breakneck speed and just trying to run 150 plays a game. But there is a need to push the tempo. Couple reasons for that. Number one, anytime you can push the tempo effectively, it forces the defense to do one of two things. Number one, it forces them in most cases to be more simplified in what they do. For example, look at the Notre Dame defense. Under Marcus Freeman, they're going to be a boundary field cornerback team. But against tempo teams, they're going to do more left-right. So you're going to be putting guys in situations where they're not necessarily accustomed to doing things. You force them to simplify. They can't make as many calls. They can't make as many checks. They can't make as many, let the offense get lined up, see how they're lined up, what their personnel is, and then get a call made from the sideline. Teams are able to do that now. They're able to, Notre Dame, by going slower, is able to get into more of a perfect call situation. But hey, here's the deal. So is the defense. And in most teams, it doesn't hurt Notre Dame. But against the better teams that are not only talented, but extremely well coached, it has hurt Notre Dame. And so you have to be able to push the tempo. I think number two, it allows you to spread the ball around more effectively. It allows you to create more ISOs and matchup situations because, again, you're forcing the defense to be more basic. The second thing that a defense can do is they can say, hey, we're playing a tempo team, but we're still going to make our calls. We're still going to get our pressures. We're still going to try to do things to confuse the offense. And sometimes that's going to work, but a lot of times what that ends up doing is that allows the offense to make even more plays. It will cause, because it causes more mistakes by the defense. The more they try to do defensively with your offense pushing the tempo, the more opportunity there is that they're going to make mistakes. Pushing the tempo also means limiting the scope of your offense. The fact of the matter is, right now, Notre Dame has way too much offense in right now. Look, in today's era, you're seeing more and more and more teams go with less variation of concepts, and it's not just air raid teams. It's even a guy like Steve Sarkisian who will run a lot of offense, but it doesn't have nearly as much scope as what Notre Dame has. It's more about what we're seeing today from teams, and this is what's made the Notre Dame defense really good, even though, again, they'll carry a lot. I'd rather have my players be really, really, really excellent at executing 5 things than just being good at executing 15. And when you have the talent that Notre Dame has, that Alabama has, that Clemson has, that Oklahoma has, if your players who are very talented are excellent from an execution standpoint at certain things, and then you can create some opportunities for them to make some schematic opportunities for them, whether it be with running the same plays, but maybe you run those plays out of 3 or 4 different formations, which allow you to isolate certain players on the defense, which allow you to, maybe get a mismatch somewhere, which allows you to take advantage of that. Those are things that you can do schematically to hurt a team, but you're not doing it to where you're running, 15, 16, 17 different pass routes from your one position, which then puts you in a situation where your younger players have a harder time getting on the field at certain positions, mainly wide receiver and to a degree quarterback. There's just so much that they have to know and understand that it almost necessitates that you play older players. That's something that has to change. Notre Dame has had multiple seasons where they've had very talented young players that they haven't been able to get on the field. And we hear all types of different excuses, traits, and all these different things, but that can't be true for every single guy that's come through. And the anomalies have been years like 2016 when Notre Dame played a lot of freshmen and sophomores, but that was a year where they only had one veteran, and that was Torrey Hunter Jr., and he got hurt in the opener and missed a couple games. So the exception has been that. The norm has been young players at receiver simply don't get on the field much. So that's got to be able to change because Notre Dame is recruiting receiver too well in recent seasons and has really throughout, beginning with Charlie Weiss. Recruiting a receiver has not been a problem at Notre Dame for over a decade. So you can't really say that. Plus, they're loaded at tight end. There's plenty of pass catcher options. And if you can get some of those younger players into the mix to allow them to be more effective, it was Jordan Johnson and Xavier Watts last year. It's going to be Lorenzo Styles and Deion Colsey this year, along with those returners. There's a lot of talent. You have to make sure that your system is predicated on having the ability to get your most talented players into some sort of role. Notre Dame can't do that because of how complex their system is. You can't just put a young guy in and say, here's the 4 routes that go run them, because the system is built around being able to make adjustments on the fly, and that's a lot harder for young players to do. They need to bring RPOs back. We did a video at irishbreakdown.com and on our YouTube channel recently. We broke down what RPOs are, why they're so important, and what they can bring to the Notre Dame offense, not just from a pass game standpoint, but also a run game standpoint. Notre Dame's yards per carry this year, despite having arguably the best line in the country, a really talented first-team back in Kyron Williams, and an explosive second-team running back in Chris Tyree, who averaged almost 7 yards a carry, Notre Dame's yards per carry average was way down. And when you throw in the fact that they had a quarterback that could run the ball a lot, the fact that they ranked so far below teams like Alabama even and Ohio State in yards per carry, it's because they didn't have any built-in protectors for the run game. RPOs would do that. And then you have the advantage of stealing yards. You have the advantage of getting players isolated. You have getting the ball out quickly, getting quarterback into a rhythm. 2018, Notre Dame ran RPOs a lot. Ian Book completed 70% of his passes, right? It's not a coincidence. When the less they started to do it, the less effective he became as a quarterback. That's not on Ian Book. That's on a coaching staff that went away from something that is such an easy thing to do, an important thing to do. There are other things they can do about the pass game, improving certain concepts, different philosophical things that they need to do. But the fact of the matter is, everything that Brian Kelly and the offensive staff have to do this offseason needs to be geared towards developing an explosive, up-tempo, better tempo is a better way of saying that, a better tempo philosophy on offense. And it can't just be about, well, we're going to do what we're doing, but a couple wrinkles here and there. That's going to make your overall average look better, and it's going to make you score more points against Purdue and Navy and and Toledo and teams like that, but it's not going to really change anything for you when you go play the big boys. And that's where Notre Dame is. Look, we know they can beat all those other teams since from 2015 and then from 2017 to the present. Notre Dame's like 51-0 against teams that finish unranked. We already know you can beat those teams, but you have a losing record against top 10 teams, and you're barely over 500 against top 25 teams in those seasons. So you've got to figure out a way to be more effective and more dominant against those teams offensively, and that's going to be a big key for Notre Dame.